You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and it's kind of weird to be doing this show today. Today is the 1-year anniversary of the world coming to a halt. Exactly 365 days ago, Rudy Gobert tested positive for the coronavirus. Before that, Tom Hanks had tested positive for the coronavirus. In response to Gobert's positive test, the NBA shut down for 4 months. The NHL followed suit. The MLB followed suit. The world came to a halt. The second that game between the Jazz and Thunder was called, that's when I started taking the coronavirus seriously. Hey, I got it wrong. You can go back to the Bill Ripken show, where I said that we're going to forget about the coronavirus very soon. Idiot Jacob strikes again. But much like the NBA, we, as a nation, recovered. We're on the other side of this. There's no more shortage of PPEs and ventilators. We have 3 vaccines that are approved to fight the coronavirus in this country. Bear in mind, this is a disease that 18 months ago didn't even exist. The fact that we have 3 vaccines to fight it is nothing short of incredible. It's funny, I said that the Cowboys had to give Dak Prescott $40 million. You can't begrudge them for it. The scientists from Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson are the ones that deserve $40 million. In fact, they deserve more. And so do the frontline workers. We're slowly getting back to normal as a country. We're not there yet, but we're on the right track. Fans are being allowed into sporting events once again. Indoor dining is returning. We haven't beaten the coronavirus yet, but we've landed a few really good punches. On the March 12th show, in 2020, I said something that my grandmother says all the time. And you know what? It's 100% right. This too shall pass. It hasn't passed yet, but again, we're on the right track. There's no question about that. I really want to talk about what's happening with LaMarcus Aldridge. His time playing with the Spurs is done. The Spurs are going to hold him out of games until they can either trade him or buy him out. There's no question that this is an incredibly classy move by the Spurs. You've got a veteran on your team who's never even been to an NBA Finals. The Spurs are the 7th seed right now. Odds are that they're not going to go on a crazy run in the playoffs. You've accomplished a lot in this league. The only thing you have left is winning a ring. We're going to try to get you to a team that puts you in a great position to do that. I get all that, but the Spurs may have just sunk their playoff hopes. LaMarcus Aldridge was a big part of what the Spurs were doing this year. Aldridge is putting up 13.7 points per game. 46.5% from the field. 36% from beyond the arc. Is he as valuable to the Spurs as a guy like DeMar DeRozan, DeJounte Murray, or Keldon Johnson? No. But Aldridge was a big part of what the Spurs were doing. With him out of the picture, I don't see how the Spurs make the playoffs. And the notion that the Spurs couldn't do anything in the playoffs, the odds are that they wouldn't have, there's no question. But once you get into the playoffs, anything can happen. If the season ended today, the Spurs are playing the Suns in the first round. Is it a guarantee that the Suns are going to beat the Spurs? I don't know. The Suns don't terrify me. Yes, they have Devin Booker. Yes, they have Chris Paul. Yes, they have DeAndre Ayton. I understand all that. But the Spurs have a great perimeter defense. Guys like Murray and Derek White will make Booker and Paul work. Aldridge would make Ayton work. That's not a cakewalk for the Suns. With Aldridge on the Spurs, I gotta be honest with you, I could see the Spurs pulling a major upset. It's not a guarantee, there's no question, but it's possible. I'll say this, out of all the current Western Conference playoff matchups, Jazz Mavericks, Suns Spurs, Lakers Nuggets, and Clippers Blazers, Suns Spurs has the best chance of ending in an upset. Jazz Mavericks could too, because Luka Doncic is capable of doing crazy things. After all, he's Luka. Love watching him play. And Porzingis is back. But I like the Spurs' chances more. There comes a point where you need to put the team's interest over the player's interest. I mean, if you can swing a really good trade, I can understand the logic. But to buy him out and get nothing back, there's no way that I'll be able to endorse that. Now, it's kind of funny. With my beloved Nets being title threats, they're mentioned as a potential landing spot for everyone. Aldridge is no exception. And people are pulling out the craziest things. Ime Udoka and Aldridge are supposedly still close friends. They used to play together with the Blazers. Sean Marks was with the Spurs when Aldridge first signed there. Yeah, let's just get everyone, right? I mean, look. I love that the Nets are mentioned in these conversations, but you've got to be realistic. How does Aldridge fit the Nets? How is that going to work? They just signed Blake Griffin. They still have Jeff Green. Where does Aldridge fit? I mean, look, I'll say this. A trade of Spencer Dinwiddie and DeAndre Jordan for LaMarcus Aldridge works, according to the NBA trade machine. LaMarcus Aldridge is better than DeAndre Jordan. As much as I've defended Jordan, Aldridge is better. I like the fit of Jordan with the Spurs. Minus Aldridge, the Spurs really only have one front court player that scares me, and that's Jakob Poeltl. I mean, Poeltl is basically just a poor man's DeAndre Jordan. People are hyping him up as a big reason why the Spurs have the flexibility to move on from Aldridge. He's not as good as Aldridge. He's not even close. He's not a bad player. There's a role for him in the league. But no one's going to be mistaking him for Tim Duncan anytime soon. Adding Jordan does make sense. Dinwiddie probably doesn't. The Spurs already have their guards of the future in Murray and White. They just drafted Devin Vassell. They still have Lonnie Walker. They still have Patty Mills. I don't see how Dinwiddie really helps the Spurs. I just don't see it happening. I don't see Aldridge coming to the Nets. With Griffin in tow, there's no way. But again, I would prefer Aldridge to Blake Griffin. No question about that. As for where Aldridge will land, if not with the Nets, the Heat would make sense. They were interested in Aldridge when he chose to sign with the Spurs. And the Heat certainly have the contracts to make it work. Myers Leonard, who is an absolutely disgusting human being. Kelly Olynyk and Andre Iguodala. They've got the pieces there. The 76ers would make sense. Aldridge is better than Mike Scott. That's really it. I don't see Aldridge fitting anywhere else. Again, it's a classy move by the Spurs to try to get him to a better team. They did it with Pau Gasol. In the 18-19 season, the Spurs made the playoffs. They were in the playoff hunt all year. Right before the buyout deadline, they bought out Gasol to help him win another ring. Gasol signed with the Bucks. The Spurs lost in the first round to the Nuggets in 7 games. You gotta think Pau Gasol would have made a difference in that 7th game, where the final score was 90-86 Nuggets. And with Gasol, the Bucks went all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. They lost to the Raptors in 6 games. Although the irony is, Pau Gasol only played 3 games for the Bucks. All in the regular season. Kind of funny how things like that work out. I get wanting to improve your reputation around the league, but the Spurs really did shoot themselves in the foot here. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Valk talk. And I'll start with the New Orleans Saints, who cut 3 pretty big names. Quan Alexander, Janoris Jenkins, and Emmanuel Sanders. Cutting those 3 guys saved the Saints $24 million. Despite that, they are still $25.5 million over the salary cap. I don't know how much Drew Brees' hopefully impending retirement will help them, but Lord knows they need it. I've never been a big Quan Alexander fan. He had a couple decent years with the Buccaneers, parlayed them into a big contract with the Niners, spent 1.5 years there, and ended up with the Saints. Didn't set the world on fire in New Orleans. He had a 60.3 overall grade for the Saints. If you take what Alexander did this year in totality, he had a 58.6 overall grade. He's just not a good player. You can do a lot better than Quan Alexander. Cutting him was a no-brainer. Janoris Jenkins is a tougher pill to swallow. I always liked the Jackrabbit, even when he was with the Giants. I liked watching him play. Last year he had a 67.4 overall grade, started every game in which he played. Jenkins will land on his feet. He's 32. He's still got a couple good years left in him. I like Jenkins a lot. I'll say this. I wouldn't mind him on the Jets next year. Lord knows they need corners. They could do a lot worse than bringing Jenkins back to MetLife Stadium. As for Sanders, I understand that he only started 5 games, but he was probably the best wide receiver the Saints had last year. Alvin Kamara was their best pass catcher, but he's a running back. Last year, Sanders was better than Traquan Smith. He was better than Michael Thomas. He was better than any of these schmageggies that you want to mention that the Saints trotted out there. Last year he had 61 catches for 726 yards and 5 touchdowns. He had a really good year. And his birthday's a day before mine. He was born on St. Patrick's Day. I don't know what that has to do with anything. I just wanted to throw that in there. In 6 days, Sanders will turn 34. But he's showing no signs of slowing down. He'll land on his feet. Again, I can't begrudge the Saints for cutting Sanders, just like I can't begrudge them for cutting Jenkins. But I don't see how the Saints can replace his production next year. For their sake, I hope they draft a really good wide receiver. Moving on now to the Bills cutting a couple players. They cut John Brown and Quinton Jefferson, thus saving them $14.4 million. The Bills now have $19.5 million in cap space. So they can sign some guys. They can't go crazy, but they do have some flexibility. I really like John Brown. I think he's a very talented wide receiver. People forget, this guy has 2,000-yard seasons to his name. His sophomore season in 2015 and in 2019. Last year, Brown only played in 9 games, but he was on his way to having another really good season. 33 catches for 458 yards and 3 touchdowns. That means that he was on pace for about 66 catches, 900 yards, and 6 touchdowns. If you need a slot receiver, sign John Brown. That would make perfect sense. Having said all that, I can't begrudge the Bills too much for cutting him. They have 3 wide receivers under contract that are better than Brown. As good as Brown is, he's not as good as Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, and Gabriel Davis. I'd love the Bills to bring back Isaiah McKenzie. But if they don't, they can draft a wide receiver and they'll be set. The Bills did a fantastic job of surrounding Josh Allen with talent. They've really established the blueprint for how you should build around a young quarterback. It starts with a number 1 wide receiver. As for Jefferson, I don't mind the Bills cutting him. He's not a bad rotational defensive lineman, but he's not great. Last year he had a 60 overall grade. Will he land on his feet? The answer is yes. He's going to turn 28 in 20 days. Someone will sign him to a 1-year deal and say, look, you're going to play about 30 snaps for us a game. You're not going to start a lot, but you'll be a rotational piece. There are worse players in the league than Quinton Jefferson. But again, I don't mind the Bills cutting him. He didn't set the world on fire last year. Moving on now to the Chiefs. Suddenly needing 2 new starting offensive tackles. Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz are gone. Cutting them saved the Chiefs about $18 million. They are still a little under $4.5 million over the cap. But boy, I'll tell you, the Chiefs are going to have a tough time replacing those guys. Those guys put together really good seasons for the Chiefs last year. Fisher had an 80 overall grade. Schwartz, when healthy, is one of the best right tackles in the NFL. I understand he only played in basically 5 games. The 6th game he only played 8 snaps. That doesn't count. But in those games he had a 74.7 overall grade. 2019, 84 overall grade. Excellent pass blocker. And you saw it in the Super Bowl. How much their absences hurt Mahomes. The guy was running for his life on every play. I understand that the Chiefs were in cap hell. But the one thing we learned from this past Super Bowl is that even Patrick Mahomes needs to be protected. You take a look at the offensive linemen that they have under contract. Nick Allegretti, solid. Andrew Wiley, useless. Laurent Duvernay-Tardif and Lucas Niang both opted out last year. You have no idea how they're going to come back. I've got a bad feeling about the Chiefs. I know it's impossible to bet against Patrick Mahomes, and I'm not saying they're not going to win the AFC West and they're not going to make the playoffs. That's not what I'm saying. But at this very moment, I don't see how they can put together a good offensive line. And that could prevent them from going to the Super Bowl in back-to-back-to-back years. Moving on now to the Titans cutting Kenny Vaccaro. And I don't mind this move for the Titans. I like Vaccaro. He's always been a solid safety, never great, but he never has been an absolute embarrassment out there. Last year, he had a 60.7 overall grade. That's not great, but that's not awful. Vaccaro's usually a little better than that, but not by much. Cutting him saved the Titans $3.9 million. They now have just under $17 million in cap space. I don't love the decision to cut Vaccaro, but I don't hate it either. Moving on now to the Vikings, cutting Riley Reef. And I do not like this move at all. Riley Reef has always been a really good left tackle. Maybe not great, but always really good. Last year, he had a 71.4 overall grade. He is a really good pass blocker. I understand that this move got the Vikings under the cap, but there's got to be another way to get under the cap than to cut one of the better left tackles in football. Every team that doesn't have a great left tackle should be all in on Reef. I don't care that he's 32 years old. He's going to get a big contract. This is a terrible move by the Vikings. Moving on now to the Cardinals, re-signing Tanner Vallejo to a 2-year deal worth $4.1 million. And this is a good move by the Cardinals. Vallejo doesn't have a lot of tape to show. He's been in the NFL since 2017. But in those 4 years, he's only played 284 snaps. To put that in perspective, that's basically the equivalent of 5 games worth of snaps. But when Vallejo has played, he's shown glimpses of talent. Last year he had a 67 overall grade. Granted, 96 snaps, but still, 67 overall grade. In 2019, he played 29 snaps. This is all for the Cardinals, by the way. And he had a 92.3 overall grade. Vallejo has talent. He's only 26 years old. I'm not saying that he's going to be the next Ray Lewis. But I think he's a solid backup in this league. To give this guy a shade over $2 million per year, that's not bad. Good move by the Cardinals. The last story to talk about is a trade rumor. According to Mike Garofalo of NFL.com, teams are calling the Patriots about N'Keal Harry. You know, it's kind of funny. I remember when Harry was drafted. It wasn't that long ago. He was the 32nd overall pick in 2019. Right before that pick was made, I was thinking to myself, I have no idea what the Patriots are going to do. They have no holes. This is Bill Belichick we're talking about. Whatever he does can't bend you out of shape. But then he picked Harry. A guy who I had like a late 2nd round grade on. And I was skeptical. I didn't think Harry should have been a 1st rounder. I wasn't crazy about him coming out of ASU. I just didn't think it was going to work. And you know what? I've been proven right. Harry has struggled to find a niche with the Patriots. In his rookie year, he only had 12 catches for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. Last year, he had 33 catches for 309 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think it's fair to call him a bust. I don't think he's ever gonna make it in this league. Maybe he can be like a 4th wide receiver, but I don't see Harry being the next Stanley Morgan. If I was another team, I'd be hesitant to give up anything more than like a conditional 6th. Maybe a 5th if I was a really good team. I don't think Harry has much of a future in the NFL, whether it's with the Patriots or with another team. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that I enjoy being a reliever Because I like getting 3 outs for the same money as getting 27.